What would you do if one quiet morning in a small English village, something appeared that no one could explain? The fields of Woolpit were like any other, calm, familiar, untouched by the strange. Farmers worked the land, children played, and life moved at its slow, predictable pace. Until the day everything changed. It began with a sound, faint, unusual, coming from the edge of a field. A farmer, curious and cautious, walked toward it. What he found there would haunt the village for generations. At the bottom of an old pit, once used to trap wolves, were two children. But they were not like any children he had ever seen. Their skin was green. Their clothes were strange, made of unfamiliar fabric. And when they spoke, their words made no sense. No one in the village could understand a single sound. They were frightened, weak, lost. And somehow, they did not seem to belong to this world at all. Were they simply children from a distant land? Or had they come from somewhere far more mysterious? To understand this mystery, we have to step back in time. Long before modern roads, before electricity, before the noise of cities, there was a small village in the English countryside known as Woolpit. Life here was simple, predictable, the kind of place where nothing truly unexpected was supposed to happen. Woolpit sat quietly in the county of Suffolk, surrounded by open fields and patches of woodland. The people who lived there were farmers, hard-working, practical, and deeply connected to the land. Their days followed the same rhythm. Sunrise meant work, sunset meant rest, and anything beyond that rhythm was often feared. The name Woolpit itself came from an old practice. Scattered around the edges of the village were deep pits, carefully dug into the ground and covered with branches and grass. These were wolf traps. In those days, wolves were not just stories. They were real, dangerous, and sometimes deadly. These pits were the villagers' way of protecting themselves and their livestock. Over time, as the wolves disappeared, many of these pits were forgotten, covered by nature, hidden in plain sight. But they were still there, silent, waiting. And it was near one of these very pits, on an ordinary day that should have been like any other, that something extraordinary was discovered. Something that did not belong to the land. Something that did not belong to their world. And from that moment on, the quiet village of Woolpit would never be the same again. And then, one day, something broke that silence. It began like any other morning in the fields near Woolpit. The air was cool, the ground still damp from the night before. A farmer, like so many others, was tending to his work, moving slowly through the land he had known his entire life. There was nothing unusual at first, until he heard it. A sound, faint, distant, almost like a cry. Not the call of an animal, not the voice of anyone he recognized. Something softer, stranger. He stopped. Listen. It came again, drifting from the direction of the old wolf pits at the edge of the field. Now those pits had long been abandoned. Most villagers avoided them. They were deep, dangerous, and easy to forget, until now. The farmer hesitated. Then, driven by curiosity more than courage, he made his way toward the sound. Step by step, the air seemed to grow heavier. The quiet around him no longer felt peaceful. It felt watchful. When he reached the pit, he leaned forward carefully and looked down. At first, he saw only darkness. Then, movement. 2 small figures huddled together at the bottom. Children. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The skin had a greenish hue. Not a trick of the light, not dirt or shadow. It was their skin. The farmer froze, unable to look away. The children looked up at him, eyes wide, filled with fear. They spoke, or tried to, but the sounds that came from their mouths were unlike any language he had ever heard. Not English, not anything familiar. Just strange, broken tones that echoed up from the pit. They were weak, frightened, clearly lost. And yet, everything about them felt out of place. Their clothing was unlike anything worn in Woolpit. The fabric, the stitching, it all seemed foreign, almost as if they had come from somewhere far beyond the village, or far beyond anything the farmer could understand. For a long moment he simply stood there, caught between fear and disbelief. Then instinct took over. He called for help. And before long, others gathered around the pit, staring down in stunned silence at the 2 children who should not have been there. In that moment, the ordinary world of Woolpit shifted, because whatever had appeared in that pit, it was not just a mystery. It was the beginning of something no one could explain. What the villagers of Woolpit had discovered in that pit was only the beginning. At first, their reaction was simple: shock, curiosity, and caution. The 2 children were carefully brought out and taken into the care of the village. No one knew who they were or where they had come from. But one thing was clear: they needed help. They were weak, exhausted, and visibly terrified of everything around them. Inside the safety of a small cottage, the villagers tried to comfort them. Food was brought: bread, meat, warm meals prepared with care. But the children refused. No matter what was offered, they would not eat. At first it seemed like fear. Perhaps they did not trust the strangers around them. But as hours turned into days, concern began to grow. They were starving, and still they would not touch the food. Until one moment changed everything. Someone brought in freshly harvested beans. The reaction was immediate. The children rushed toward them, grabbing, eating desperately, as if it was the only food they recognized. From that day on, beans became the only thing they would eat. It was strange, but it kept them alive. Still, their behavior remained deeply unsettling. They spoke often, but no one could understand them. Their language was unlike anything the villagers had ever heard. It carried a rhythm, almost musical, but completely foreign. And they were afraid of light. When brought outside, they would squint, cover their eyes, and cling to each other, as if the daylight itself was something unfamiliar, something painful. Everything about them felt misplaced. As time passed, the boy grew weaker. Despite being fed, despite being cared for, his strength faded. Day by day, he slipped further away from life, until quietly, he was gone. The village mourned, but confusion lingered. The girl, however, survived. Slowly, she began to change. Her strength returned, her fear lessened, and over time, she started to understand the world around her. But even as she adapted, the question remained. Who were these children, really? And what kind of place could shape a life so different from everything the villagers had ever known? As time passed and the fear slowly began to fade, the girl did something no one in Woolpit expected. She began to learn. At first it was only a few words, simple sounds repeated again and again. The villagers spoke gently to her, patiently, day after day. And little by little, she started to understand. Then one day, she spoke back. Not in the strange language she arrived with, but in broken, careful English. It wasn't much, just enough to answer simple questions. But it was enough to begin telling her story. When asked where she had come from, the girl hesitated, as if trying to find words for something difficult, something far away. She spoke of a place unlike Woolpit, a land where the sun did not shine. There was light, she said, but it was dim, like the fading glow of evening stretched across the sky without end. No bright mornings, no clear daylight. Just a constant twilight. And in that place, everyone was like her. Their skin was green. The villagers listened in silence, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing. She called it something that sounded like St. Martin's Land, a place separated from the world they knew. According to her, she and her brother had been tending animals, just as children might do, when something strange happened. There was a loud noise, a sudden force, and then darkness. When they opened their eyes again, they were no longer in their world. They were in Woolpit, lost, frightened, alone. The story made little sense. It didn't fit with anything the villagers understood about the world. And yet, the girl spoke with a quiet certainty. Not like someone telling a tale, but like someone remembering home. As the days went on, her English improved. Her skin slowly lost its green tone. She began to live as one of them. But her story never changed. A world without sun. A land of green people. A place that, by all logic, should not exist. And still she insisted. That was where she came from. And so, her story remained. A place without sunlight. A land of green people. A journey no one could explain. For the people of Woolpit, and for those who would hear the tale in the years that followed, one question lingered. What really happened? Some believed the answer was far less mysterious than it seemed. They suggested the children may have come from a nearby region, possibly foreign settlers, lost, displaced, and unable to speak English. In those times, it wasn't uncommon for small communities of outsiders to live apart, speaking their own language, wearing unfamiliar clothing. The green color of their skin? That, some argued, could have been caused by malnutrition, a condition brought on by poor diet, long periods without proper food, something that might also explain the boy's weakness. And over time, as the girl adapted and began eating normally, her skin slowly returned to a more natural tone. It was a simple explanation. Logical, comforting even. But not everyone was convinced. Others believed there was something far stranger at work. They pointed to the girl's story, the consistent details, the quiet certainty in her voice, the way she described a world not just different, but entirely separate. A place without sunlight. A place that sounded less like a distant land and more like another realm. Some wondered if the children had somehow crossed a boundary, passed through a hidden space between worlds. Not magic, perhaps, but something unknown. Something not yet understood. And then there were those who didn't try to explain it at all. They simply accepted the story as it was. A mystery. One that refused to be solved. Even today, centuries later, no single explanation has ever fully answered every question. Were they lost children, shaped by hardship and confusion? Or were they something more? Something that, for a brief moment in time, slipped into our world and left us with a story we still cannot explain. And perhaps that is why the story never truly faded. Because it was never just a tale told in whispers. It was written down, carefully recorded by men of their time, chroniclers who believed this event was worth remembering. Among them were Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh, both documenting the strange appearance of the Green Children in Woolpit. These were not storytellers chasing legends. They were observers of history. And that changes everything. Because when a story survives not just in memory, but in written record, it carries weight. Centuries have passed since that day in Woolpit. The fields are still there. The village still stands. But the questions remain. Not because we lack answers, but because none of them feel complete. The Green Children are remembered not for what we know, but for what we still cannot explain. And perhaps that is why we are still telling their story today. And so, the story remains. Written in history, carried through generations, yet never fully understood. The children of Woolpit came without warning. They lived among strangers, and then, in time, their world faded into ours. But the question never left. Were they simply lost children, caught in hardship, shaped by a world we no longer recognize? Or did they come from somewhere beyond our understanding, a place just out of reach? We may never know. But perhaps that's the point. Because some stories aren't meant to be solved, only remembered.